All right, thanks. All right, so this talk is an effort to try and envision a way to integrate some of the building equity and capacity work we've been doing with some pilot SZ4D science. So I'll be giving this talk, but a shout out to the GeoArray team for all of the work they've done to sort of help me holla back. And so I also want to, let me make sure I go back too far. Yep. All right, describe the collective impact criteria. This for me is sort of kind of the rule of thumb for me about trying to think about the strategy of trying to do this integration. Are we achieving what we're looking for? And so I come back to this collective impact criteria as a way to kind of evaluate, is it helping us to achieve what we're looking for? So again, those things you would have seen from Andy yesterday would be, is there a common agenda? Is there mutually beneficial activities? Is there a shared measurement system? Is there continuous communication? And is there a backbone support organization? All right, the other thing that I think sort of drove in many ways the vision of this talk is the desire for more interdisciplinary collaboration with SZ4D. This is a key component of what BCG has been after. And I think for many of us in this room, the hope with SZ4D is that it can enable more of this, right? To hear the excitement in many of those sort of working group talks, it was about working with other working groups, right? And so I think in order to make that a reality and not just a vision, we actually have to set some goals for what improved interdisciplinary collaboration looks like. And so BCG worked on this. In our chapter, you'll see sort of a rough draft of what these goals might be. Things like innovative new ideas and construction of new knowledge. I think that's what many people hope for out of interdisciplinary collaboration. I think, it could also turn to increased publications with authors from different disciplines, increased numbers of grant proposals and funded projects with PIs and co-PIs from different disciplines, involvement of disciplines less common in subduction zone research. That's perhaps getting a little further away from what you might have envisioned. But I think back to sort of stuff you might have envisioned would be training of early career researchers with broader understanding and skill sets. And then also the sharing of methodologies and data between different disciplines, right? That, again, what someone is doing in one field for machine learning may be useful for someone else in a different field. All right, so when thinking about those as our goals, I think that the part of SZ4D that we've heard about that sort of has the potential to capture many of these things, I think is the GeoArray sort of idea. And so you would have heard yesterday, the creating support for terrestrial-based field science as a facility is potentially one of the most transformative aspects of SZ4D. I think that comment likely has, components of science in it, but I think it also has components of equity and capacity building in it too, right? That in order for us to sort of make progress on equity and capacity building, it has to be transformed. It has to really change how people think about things. So this idea that, there's an opportunity between the sort of different ways that we might go out and collect geologic data at large scale and of different types. I think there's a real opportunity, based on that, to think about, different ways of, doing capacity building and doing it in equitable ways. So one of the things that's come from the GeoArray sort of effort has been the importance of a field station, right? I think from a logistics point of view, it's pretty clear, right? Shared lodging, vehicles, processing, and research equipment, meeting space, all of that I think is going to be pretty important. I'll underscore even that processing and research equipment I think is growing as an idea of what could be done in a sort of field facility that could really accelerate, what is learned and sort of how adaptive it is in the field. But I think it also just creates this really unique opportunity for coordinated science, right? I think this could be very formalized in terms of, this group goes out with that group, but it could be informal where because there's a shared facility, folks are having an opportunity to sort of interact with each other that wouldn't necessarily have happened. So the idea of a physical space, creates some of both the logistical opportunities as well as some of the science and interdisciplinary opportunities. All right, so I think, if you have that shared facility and people are coming through there, I think you, of course, then have opportunities for training and onboarding that you wouldn't necessarily have if things were more distributed. And And so there have been sort of several things I think we've seen within our community that demonstrate the importance of this. I think for many field camps, sort of that meeting that happens before going out to the field, perhaps in a classroom, could be really essential for that. But I think we've seen it in field-based sort of data collection as well. I've certainly seen it at the Iris Pascal Center about how important it is to have a group of researchers come together before heading out to the field to deploy and talk about sort of best practices and how to deal with different issues that might come up. There's also information from the literature about how this really helps inclusivity, right? That if we get everyone sort of on the same page before heading out to the field, there's a real opportunity that folks are able to sort of acclimate to that environment and participate more fully. And so there are opportunities, I think, with that as well. We also have sort of begun discussion about sort of commonality and data collection that could take place there as well, that we can help promote, fair data collection, right? One of the things that has been discussed quite a bit is the idea of using StravelSpot sort of techniques for data collection. And in fact, having someone from StravelSpot come and sort of talk to folks about sort of how to best get data into their sort of format. But that, trying to do that at larger scale creates opportunities for StravelSpot to think about ways to train. So there's an opportunity for a mutually beneficial activity there. So just as a particular example. I think there's also good geoscience education research support for trying to do this sort of coordinated, sort of single facility or sort of given place kind of opportunity. I think partly that comes from place-based education literature that's been shown to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? The idea of working in a place and being physically there and really having folks focused on learning about that place really creates a connection for many folks, particularly if they have some prior connection to that area. So again, I think there are some real opportunities to bring folks in locally to participate, in the science, if there's a specific location that's chosen. But I think it also sort of creates opportunities for problem-based learning, right? That, particularly if we're seeking to develop interdisciplinarity, the idea of working on a specific problem or a handful of problems, in a sort of given space, there's good literature to demonstrate that is really one of the best ways to train folks in interdisciplinary thinking. So CIDR is certainly a great example of this, right? Folks will come together to work on a problem or a set of problems, or develop a problem and work on it during a particular period of time, right? But that's not field-based, right? That what we're envisioning here is sort of a field-based sort of strategy. So I think could take, CIDR to sort of a different sort of context and learn some things about sort of how place-based learning might sort of interact with problem-based learning. I also want to try and emphasize, right, a lot of what I just described there is a bit more formal learning and instruction, but we can envision a lot of informal learning taking place, through a common facility, right? That there's substantial career training that we know occurs outside of formal instruction, right? That's part of why we're at a meeting like this, right? Is that we learn and educate others and ourselves in these kind of informal ways out in the hallway, out of the bar afterwards, right? And so the idea that we could also schedule times for informal learning could be pretty important in a setup like this. So things like a dinner and discussion. You can't do lunch and learn because people are going to be out in the field during lunchtime. But when the sun sets, there's still opportunities then to have those kind of interactions and take time sharing sort of project ideas with each other to learn about sort of what are some of those overlaps that we may not sort of fully grasp at times. Of course, another really key ingredient here is this aspect of community building, right? That if we're envisioning ways for different groups or different people from different groups to come together to work on this, there are real opportunity to build the SZ4D community in ways that we aren't able to otherwise. So I do think that there is an opportunity to sort of realize this vision of collective impact by embracing the community experiment strategy. I think part of what comes with the vision for GeoArray is sort of a community experiment at a scale that hasn't sort of fully been attempted in sort of a geologics setting, right? So IODP has certainly been doing this for multiple decades, right? And so we can learn some lessons about the strategies that have been successful for IODP, right? Thinking about having a community group that decides on the science targets, envisioning data collection that will be open. There is an embargo period that would sort of help to sort of provide support for the folks that are doing that data collection and some buy-in for them, but then also thinking about ways that the analysis could be shared, right? So, thinking about the GeoArray scenario, samples that are collected there, could they be sent off to multiple different labs that we sort of share the processing across multiple labs, right? In a way that it becomes more of a community experiment. We also learn then about differences in how different labs process things. There are opportunities for learning in that way as well. And then thinking also about sort of, are there strategies to predefine certain teams that are responsible for manuscript writing, right? This still feels very nebulous to me, not having been on IDP crews. How does this sort of horse trading happen that folks sort of make some of those decisions, right? But I think there's an opportunity for us to learn about that process and try and implement it in a community science sort of strategy. I do think, part of the reason I'm standing up here, right, is that, I think from a BECG perspective, there are real opportunities to learn about this process, right? The evaluation that can take place about what's working and what's not, in these settings is going to be really important for long-term success of these kinds of endeavors. And we have a somewhat limited track record of doing these kinds of community experiments at this scale, particularly if you're not stuck on a ship. And so, trying to shake that single PI mentality is going to be tricky. And so I think, better sort of envisioning what are the incentives for folks to participate in a community experiment. What are ways to measure that? What are ways to track that? How do we sort of help sort of identify that in the application process? Those are aspects that we need to learn more about. And so in that sense, we need to think about what are the things that we want to assess. We'll likely need help from outside our community with that assessment. So I was trying to invite those folks to participate in this type of project. But also it's developing what are the measures that we want to use to sort of decide that this is working or not, and is it sort of helping us to achieve what we're looking for. So I think it's time to really envision the pilot study. You heard from some of the feedback from yesterday, right? That it's time to put dots on a map. I think it's the same for this as well, right? So the scale of a pilot study would make sense, I think, to demonstrate the proof of concept of trying to do this integrated sort of field station kind of idea. The geographic area would need to be small enough, I think, initially here to make sure that a single field station, would make logistical sense, right? If we're talking about trying to do samples 100 kilometers from the field station, it starts to break down at that point. So trying to envision a geographic area that's representative, I think, is pretty important. So one of the ideas that's come up is the Klamath Mountains of Southern Cascadia as a potential site. Part of the reason there is that we can envision sort of multiple aspects here that could work: an exhumed subduction zone interface, an exhumed arc, active 4-arc faults, and incision river networks. All these could potentially be achieved in an area like that. So I think next steps are, some lessons from the MSRI. I think we got to sketch out the vision, the scale, the scope, the priorities, start generating cost estimates, building a project management plan. This is going to help us to sort of know, are we able to achieve what we want based on what our priorities are once we see some of those numbers. And I'll make a pitch for a little bit of a science wrapper too, that I think we should learn some lessons from Earth system science about ways to sort of pitch this, right? That we could envision seeking to deduce the coupling or the feedback loops between crustal and superficial processes that can help us understand the relationships between volcanoes, crustal faults, and landslides. I think, if we look at what sort of the traditional Earth system science has sort of accomplished over a few decades, right? The climate, biogeochemical, human sort of interactions have taught us a lot about these sort of relationships between different aspects in the system. And so trying to sort of understand that could be really helpful. In particular, one of the things that come out of that is tipping points, right? This idea that things really accelerate based on feedback loops. And so I think there's some opportunities to learn things like that by taking that kind of scientific approach. All right, so I'll just end with this, right? Back to the sort of, what were the goals we were hoping for, right? So, the question is, can we design a project like this that would help us to achieve these goals? All right, thanks.